everyone, and welcome to this edition of ESG Law Live. I am absolutely thrilled to have you. In case you don't know me, I'm Christine Yuri. I am the founder of ESG for In-House Counsel. And on this episode, we're going to be talking everything about ESG data and AI. If you are trying to pull together your ESG data, getting ready for a report, or just trying to figure out how to organize everything a little better, then you are absolutely in the right place. Just to kick off, I would love it if you would introduce yourself in the comments, say your name, say where you're from. Truly, one of the best things about these live events is that you have an opportunity to see who else is interested in this topic and to meet each other, to chat a little bit, to ask questions. So please put in a comment and let us know that you are here. So while you are putting in your comments, I'm going to do a little introduction to myself and of our agenda. So like I said, I'm Christine Yuri. I am a former chief legal officer and chief sustainability officer from a Fortune 500 energy company. And today what I do is I help companies design and implement ESG programs that are right-sized to their organization and that also really focus on meeting client and investor expectations. So that's my perspective that I come from as an advisor. And here today, we are going to be talking about some of the most common questions that I see people struggle with as I'm working together to get their ESG program in place. So this is really about ESG data and reporting. We are going to tackle three big subjects. The first is ESG data and the processes that you can use to make the data collection a little bit easier. The second is really how, once you have that ESG data, you can use it to improve your business objectives overall. And then the third is AI. We all know that AI is the big topic, and no surprise, you can really use generative AI to help supercharge your ESG data collection and your reporting. So we're going to be sharing a few tips on how to do that. Hey, Andrea. Thank you for saying hello, CEO of ESG for All in Brazil. Love to have somebody from Brazil signing on. I know that you have a lot of ESG regulations coming down the pike there, and then I'm sure you're needing to get things organized. So thanks for being here. So without further ado, I'm going to bring on our esteemed guest. Where are we at? There we go. Don Casper. Hello, Don.
Hello.
I am truly thrilled to have Don on with us today. There's truly no better person to tackle this subject with. Don is the co-founder and SVP of Innovation for Liminal Data, an AI-driven sustainability platform that delivers actionable insights and automates ESG collection. With nearly 20 years of experience in sustainability, Don's built a reputation for creating cutting-edge, data-driven solutions, focusing in the sustainability space. Don specializes in helping organizations operationalize ESG initiatives and leverage sustainability for a competitive advantage. So with that, welcome, Don. We are thrilled to have you.
Glad to be here, Christine, and thank you everyone for joining today. I've seen a lot of attendees' names. Some of those are familiar, but many who I've never had the pleasure of meeting before. And I look forward to the conversation and diving right into the intersection of ESG and artificial intelligence.
Wonderful. Thanks, Don. Oh, thanks, Marielle, for signing on. I know you're off in the Netherlands, so it's a little bit late for you. We really appreciate having you here. All right. With that, we're going to go ahead and get kicked off directly into the subject matter. Oh, Don, when I start working with clients on their ESG programs, typically one of the first hurdles that they hit is the ESG data collection process. Inevitably, you need the data for two big reasons. One is somebody's asking you to report it, so you have to share the data. And the second and most important reason is that without good ESG data, it's very hard to set KPIs and goals and really figure out what you should be doing in your ESG program. But it is definitely a hurdle people face. And what I wanted to do today is to provide some ideas for the audience on how can they practically make that data collection process easier for themselves and easier for their companies. So what do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a common problem in the industry right now. So it's due to the fact that ESG just covers so much ground. Not only is it environmental, social, and governance, but if you think about what that means to a company, it's different business units. Maybe you have to go out to vendors to do things like scope 3 calculations, but it's a lot of ground to cover for what is typically a very small team. So, right, the average ESG team is maybe one person if you're lucky. If you have one, maybe two. I don't think I've ever seen an ESG team that's truly bigger than 4 full-time people. But if you think about the ground that they have to cover and really what it means to articulate what you're doing in terms of sustainability. So when we talk about data, it's really about going out to the different business units, the different kind of functions of your company, gathering raw information. And I make a distinction here because, you said a keyword is KPIs. We refer to them as metrics as well. But these are calculated values. If you think about something like a carbon footprint, is that there's no handy meter that's measuring this. Generally, you're going out to different departments and getting all these pieces that ultimately add up to a carbon footprint. And that data is clunky at best. So kind of the best companies that I've worked with in the past might have some point solutions in place. But I think there's a stat that it's like 43% of companies are still using spreadsheets to manage their ESG processes. And that's absolutely true. We see that time and time again, I would say, with most of the people that we talk to. And so kind of going back to that idea of this really wide swath of what ESG data is, there's a lot of people involved. Generally, it's cross-functional teams. When we say data, we're talking about data that's living in maybe your HR system, maybe it's utility bills, maybe it's in different ERP systems, it's PDFs. But generally, we see everything kind of converge for most companies into a spreadsheet. Which, right, I consider myself an expert at spreadsheets. There are a lot of people that are, but they're clunky. And one of the downsides are that you don't know who touched it last. It's hard to do kind of revision tracking. And so when you think about why people are collecting ESG data, generally it's to put into a big sustainability report at the end of the year. There's a compliance angle, but it's a lot of data and really clunky processes. So I think to your question, where do you start? Is usually kind of the first stumbling block that people hit. But it's really about building repeatable processes, because what we see time and time again is that covering this much ground, having data come from different places in different forms takes a lot of time and effort. So if you're doing an annual report, 6 months, 9 months of the year might be spent going around and gathering this data, making sure that it looks good at the end of the year, putting together a sustainability report. And we haven't even touched on like the ad hoc requests. So your customers, your investors are asking for something this quarter. It's really about building these repeatable processes, making sure you know where to go for information, what information you're going to get. If you're trying to build a metric or a KPI, do you understand kind of what data is going to lead to that? So if you're doing something like a carbon footprint, like I mentioned, maybe it's utility bills, maybe there's different point solutions, but I think the key to success is being strategic about it, building out a plan, making sure that you know where to get data, how you should expect to get it, when you should expect to get it, and making sure that your team and the different personas and the teams that you work with know what their responsibility is to provide that data to you. And then from there, you can start to optimize that with software. So, using software like Liminal, there's plenty of other ESG data management solutions out there, but really automating that. So going from this repeatable process to right now a deep sigh of relief, because you don't have to do the manual work of doing all this communication. It's automating it so that when you have to do a report, when you have to do anything in the realm of ESG, basically, you have that data ready, and you can spend your time in the more value-driven things like being smart about how this will impact your company operations, and how you can take that and put that information into action.
Really interesting, Don. Yeah, absolutely. From my experience as a CSO, having a repeatable process for data collection is absolutely critical. I want to dive into that and just get super practical for the audience. So let's say you're listening to this and you're hearing, okay, great, guys, that sounds good. Repeatable process, that makes sense. what are 3 steps that our audience can take and start, this week, this month, getting together their next report to take that idea of repeatable processes and start making progress towards it?
Sure. Yeah. So, if I had to break it down into 3 steps, one, I would say game plan, right? So it's really about what are you trying to achieve? I know in particular, you advocate for these right size reports, but really scoping this out and understanding what is the ultimate goal. Are we going for CSRD or GRI, or is there a compliance angle? Are we trying to make a customer happy or an investor happy? But really scoping to say, okay, what is the end goal and what am I trying to produce? Step two is really coming up with that strategy of, okay, now let's reverse engineer this and say, what data do I need to support this initiative? With compliance and these voluntary ESG frameworks, what's nice is they kind of give you a roadmap of what that scope should be. And then you can focus on working backwards to say, okay, what data do I need to have? There's no company out there that does this right the first time. In fact, it usually takes a couple years. So understanding where you can even get data, what story can you tell with that data, really is step two. And then step three is building a repeatable process. So it's as you mentioned in the past, there are many conversations, is a lot of times, right, the sustainability person's words fall on deaf ears. So they ask for information. Sometimes it's a little bit uncomfortable for people in other departments. They're not going to give you the right data the first time, right? They might push back and say, well, why do you need this data? I don't have a good way of giving it to you. But understanding all those obstacles that you're going to face so that you can kind of overcome those hurdles over time, start to make those processes repeatable, and really start to build up this rapport with the people that you're going to have to be working with to collect this information, so that your job is really focused on, let's get through the data collection piece and really focus on how do we create value for our companies.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Particularly the first point on deciding, what your goal is. I talk to a lot of clients at the beginning that with a bunch of requests, are we reporting to CDP? Are we filling out EcoVadis? Are we doing voluntary reporting? Do we have regulatory requirements? And if you can just, I always try narrowly focus on what you're doing as much as possible, because you can't do everything. So starting with just that North Star is critical. So ESG data, let's say we're collecting it, and often there is a driver on reporting, whether it's regulations or voluntary reporting, and that I've seen initially that's just what folks want to get out is a report, but you're trying to motivate other people to participate in this data collection process, and guess what? They're not going to be super excited about ESG reporting or about compliance. That can be hard to motivate folks around. And what I find really interesting is what else you can do with this data besides put it into a report that a third party wants. So really, what have you seen, Don? I'd love to hear how you've seen companies actually use ESG data to move towards their business objectives.
Sure. Yeah. So I would say that, right, it's important to think of sustainability is that there is an ethical angle to it and you're doing things for the right reasons, but it also means sustainable businesses. So that means that there's this interconnection of what your company does and the product and service it provides and how efficiently it does that. And can you do that responsibly? And it's really about the longevity of the company. And I think kind of reframing sustainability or ESG to think about that first and saying, well, this is really creating value for my company. We work with private equity firms that have portfolio companies, different asset owners of different asset classes, and individual companies. And the first thing that I recommend is really framing sustainability. And this is a benefit to the company. We're trying to understand how to make things better, which means that generally there's a pretty big financial incentive for someone to do that. By starting there, I think you shift the conversation from this is about compliance or this is something that we have to do because someone's telling us to do, and really seeing it as a benefit to the company. So I tend to think about compliance or kind of your annual report is really more of a byproduct of that process. And so I think reframing that helps you engage different members of your team. We've worked with different companies that have a logistics unit, they have IT teams, and you really need everyone on board. So getting them to see that North Star and that greater value is kind of one way to get over that compliance hurdle. But I think it goes back to kind of scoping and what do you really look to get out of this? A lot of times, and I think going back to the point of some people get uncomfortable when you start asking for information, especially if they've never had to give it to an ESG person within their own company before. But you start to understand your business more, right? It could be logistics, it could be the energy spent in your offices, it could be how you manage different assets. But I think kind of engaging people early on and being very strategic about your processes, makes it over time an incredibly easy process. Sure, there's data collection, sure, there's obstacles along the way, but this really is, in my belief, a fundamental part of businesses. And so when we go out to the market and what we see, I mean, these are some of the first stumbling blocks is, okay, maybe you get over the data piece, there's a compliance angle. But the way that investors look at this, the way that customers are looking at this is really, are you running your business responsible? Because that has an impact on us. Obviously, if they've invested money in you, then they want to see a return on investment and make sure that you're being responsible if you're looking from the investor viewpoint. But aside from compliance and investors, probably the biggest driver that we see really are other businesses. So we're starting to see an uptick in procurement questions around ESG. There's spot checks happening after procurement. So getting people on board and realizing that compliance is really a byproduct about this. We're not doing this because we have to or because someone's telling us. It's because we want to be competitive, and we want to be able to respond to people ad hoc and show them how clear our strategies are and how well we know our own business.
Yeah. 100% right. Often when I talk with clients, their biggest driver is their own clients. And in a B2B sector, their clients that are mature, global, enterprise level clients are sending ESG questionnaires. They want this data. Sometimes they have regulatory drivers. Sometimes they have their own goals that impact their supply chain. And what I like to do with folks that are just kicking off a program is go collect that information so you know how how this data will help you respond to RFPs, how it will help you be more competitive. So that's always a key piece. And then also, there can be real cost savings opportunities. I've seen manufacturing companies that look at their scope 2 and figure out, oh, if we put in more efficient equipment, would actually be able to save a significant amount of money and offset the cost of that equipment. More in a professional services context, often there's a big chunk of budget that gets spent on travel. If you get your travel data, you can figure out often how to drive down the amount of travel, which both drives down your footprint and then saves you on costs. So I think that the benefits of this from a business objective perspective can go both ways. It can help you, win more business, be more successful in that way. And then it also can point out cost savings opportunities that just help the bottom line. So as you're collecting data and figuring out your reporting process, just getting those points in place so that as you can kind of get more buy-in and get people to participate by showing how it aligns with their objectives is just critical. And I just want to say hello to Derek and Anna. Thank you so much for dropping something in the comments, and we're delighted to have you join us today. With that, let's move on to the third element that we promised folks today, which is AI. We all know AI is the hot topic. Might be the reason that a lot of you joined, because many people want to learn how to use particularly generative AI to help make their jobs easier. I can tell you, I've used generative AI quite a bit to make my job easier. I have a pro subscription to one of the providers, and I'll provide a couple examples of how I do this. And then Dawn, I know you have a much more mature version, and I want to be sure to talk about that. What I've done, so the most basic use I found is to go out for research and say, hey, I want to learn about what this regulation says or what this kind of disclosure says. So, simply like tell me about, IFRS S1 or whatnot. I mean, that's kind of an acronym, but it will come back. It'll tell me about the statute. It's a lot faster than just doing a Google search. And I use one that has citations to footnotes, so I can tell where it comes from, go in and read those resources. It's a much faster way for me to get up to speed than just kind of hitting random resources. And then I do actually use it when I'm helping clients form communications. Now you have to be a bit careful here if you're just on a broad system like a chat GPT, because what you don't want to do is upload confidential information that can then get put into the system. But a lot of companies already have a ton on their website about relevant ESG practices, and you can just go in and for your company and say, hey, write a paragraph on what we're doing for diversity. And it will come up with a paragraph. You might have to give it some more direction. You might have to come up with something more specific, but all of a sudden, you're not writing off a blank page. And I have to tell you, that just shaves time, a ton of time off of what it takes if you have to have those written responses. So Don, those are just basic use cases that I found in my day-to-day work with clients. But I'd really love to hear, from your perspective, you built this AI platform. What do you think the capabilities are that are out there right now for AI to help ESG professionals gather and report on the data and generally make their lives easier?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's important to make a distinction between AI and generative AI, like you correctly pointed out. So I've been working in the AI space for 14 plus years right now, and traditionally AI, you can think of it as machine learning, where it's really good at statistical analysis. It's finding and predicting things in the future, but it's more of a data analytics play. We do have elements of that too, but a lot of times in software, that's behind the scenes. So when you see different software that say they're an AI-powered platform, that's typically what they're referring to as that data analysis piece. That can be extremely helpful, and it's incredibly kind of advanced and helpful in a lot of parts of ESG, but you don't see or touch it. I think the distinction that I would make with generative AI is it's something that you're interacting with directly, right? And in fact, a lot of people, I think, get a little scared off by AI because you're confronted with a prompt. You hear about prompt engineering and hallucination, all these technical terms, when it's really as simple as asking a question and getting an answer. If you don't like the answer, you ask another question. I always tell people what's great about AI is you can interrogate it. So if we're talking about generative AI, and you say, I don't know, what's required for CSRD, you can type in, tell me the requirements of CSRD. What do I need to comply? And you'll get a really good answer. But now you can take it a step further and keep asking it and say, okay, well, how do I calculate scope 2 emissions? And that's where the interrogation comes in, is you can keep asking a follow-up question. So not only is it a search tool, but it's a great research tool. Now, if we look at the role of a typical sustainability professional, we've already mentioned that part of the problem with data analysis is, or data collection, is you have to go out to different departments, and it really crosses a lot of subject matter expertise. Right, a sustainability professional can't be a data scientist. They can't be an expert in business analyst. They can't be an expert in logistics, but AI can. So generative AI really helps to bridge these gaps and seemingly give you superpowers. Why that's important, you mentioned it, is it's shaving off time. So if 6 months out of the year are spent collecting data, you're left with very little time to do some analysis. Right, we build out those repeatable processes that we talked to, and now we enable those superpowers where now you can start to analyze your data, ask those questions, fill in those gaps of your knowledge of what are you trying to do, going back to what we mentioned with the scope. So is it compliance, right? If you're a supplier to General Motors, it's really easy for you, like you said, go onto their website, download their publicly disclosed sustainability report, load it into a chat GPT or something similar, and start to say, what are the things that GM really cares about, and how do I answer those questions? So I think that's kind of a really important thing to pull out. At Liminal, we do things in a special way, and we've kind of geared our solution specifically for the sustainability use case. But what I would say is it's truly an assistant. And if you look at just the dollars and the time spent to build an ESG report, let's say you're a mid-sized company and your only imperative is really show the world all the good things that you're doing, publish an annual sustainability report, you can really kind of unwind that, because most businesses are spending a ton of money on consultants, right? Not that consultants are bad, but a lot of the things that you're asking them to do are pretty low-level tasks. why not let Gen AI really take over that, the research aspect, the combining the data aspect, answering questions. We use it and we see our customers use it for doing things like gap analysis. Maybe they're in year 3 or year 4 of their sustainability report. They're not quite ready to submit to GRI or CDP or one of the voluntary frameworks. So they can do a gap analysis. They can load up the report and say, how far am I from doing this? Another common use case is looking at your roadmap and how numbers have changed over time. And are we on track to be in alignment with the Paris Climate Agreement, right? Are we going to be net zero by 2040? Here's my decarbonization roadmap. Here's my current data. Are we on track to meet those objectives? So I think AI itself is a very powerful tool. It can shave off a lot of time. It can save you money. It can extend your capabilities. But I think it benefits everyone to get a little bit comfortable with it because the future is here. It's not going away. And I think it can just carry so much of the heavy burden that most sustainability people are faced with, especially since we mentioned that, generally the sustainability team is 1 to 4 people. They're overburdened with a lot of different things. AI is one of the answers to help them.
Yeah. Oh, so right on, Don. And I know you teed up a video for us that just gives an example of how the Liminal platform works. And I want to show that, and then maybe you can talk us through it a little bit, because I really think the video helps envision, if you're using a Chat GPT-4 or whatnot, what could be the next level? How could you, take use of AI to the next level to help with this? So I'll start the video and you can just talk us through it.
Sure. Yeah, so this is a brief minute-long video, pre-recorded. What we're showing is that really what we're using AI, and in this case, we're using ChatGPT specifically, but you saw some pie charts, you saw some bar charts. You're building up a knowledge base. You're showing, you're putting all of your data, all of your hard work into one place. And then now what you're seeing is really that interrogation step. So having that familiar prompt interface, what you're seeing now, I know it's very hard to read, but what we're trying to show is you can get very detailed responses based on your information with simple prompts. So what you're seeing, kind of the first prompt was looking and saying, summarize last year's sustainability report. Most organizations, when they're doing their 2024 report, 2025 report, they're looking at the previous year. So summarizing that, maybe changing the tone and the voice of that and using that as a starting point, doing an analysis, a gap analysis to see how far are we from CSRD compliance or GRI, or kind of pick your flavor of compliance or regular or voluntary framework. And then kind of lastly, I know it went quick, but having the ability to actually analyze the data. So you saw really quickly a plot pop up. What ChatGPT was able to do through our platform was it understands kind of the context of what you're doing. We've built some nice features that suit sustainability people very well, things like a knowledge base and understanding that, right, you're coming back to the same prompt over a period of months. But being able to kind of put your data science cap on and really break down what you're seeing. And right, at this point, we've already moved past the data issues. And now you're really focusing on how do I create the most value for my company? And ChatGPT just happens, and generative AI more generally just happens to be a really good solution for that.
Yeah. Yeah, what I love about the liminal solution and solutions like it for this is, I mentioned earlier, I use a pro license on Perplexity. That's my tool, but I do have to be careful to not upload any kind of confidential data, because you don't want to get that into the large language model. But if you have a good supplier for a solution, then you can create a library with your own materials that aren't necessarily public and actually start querying those materials and building off of it. So to me, that's the big difference between just using a general tool or having a point specific tool that was built for this purpose. So I can't believe it. We're already at time. That went super quickly. I do want to give you a chance, Don, to just say if people have more questions about what you're doing, data, AI, and ESG data, or liminal, how do they track you down?
Sure. Yeah. So anyone can reach out to me. I'm easy to find on LinkedIn. You can look me up, Don Casper, Liminal Data. You can also email me directly at don@liminalimpact.com or visit our URL at liminalimpact.com.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Don. It's been a pleasure to have you. And now I'm Christine Ury. You can also find me on LinkedIn at any time. Send me a direct message with a question. I'm happy to chat about the particular ESG challenges you're facing in your company and brainstorm some ideas for how you can move forward. So don't be shy. Reach out anytime. And check out my content because I'm always publishing something new that is designed to make your life just a little bit easier.
Thank you, everyone.